I'll listen to your show, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep, thanks.
I was that kind of theist. I just had answers and just kind of didn't really think, and then finally started thinking, and it was such a different.
And
it was
now
so
you
different.
have
I can't even explain how different it was to just go about my life like robotically to actually thinking.
Yeah, and now you are thinking and you have no answers whatsoever in regards of origins. Isn't it, Jenna? Because when I called in and asked the hosts of these shows like Eric and so forth, the last resort was always to say, oh, we don't know, we are working on it. So
do you remember was there like a moment or a question, or was it just, do you think it was just like it took this much time and this much thought before the balance of questions hit?
I started losing weight and started wanting to know why, started doing research, then started doing research into science, and then started wondering, okay, what else don't I know? And that's when I was like, wait a second. I just started seeing the world like, wait a second. There's a lot I don't know out there. And
it's so granted, I've been hosting this show for 15 years. And recently we had my friend David McRaney on, who does the You Are Not So Smart podcast. He's also doing a book on essentially changing minds and how people go about changing minds. And in the course of this.
Yeah, and that is probably what you try to do all the time. That's the purpose of your show. And I don't really know why. Why are you dragging people to disbelief? Because it doesn't bring any good. It doesn't improve the life of people. It just brings them of their hope, of eternal life, of meaning. Atheism is basically a worldview where you have no meaning, where you have no hope. When you die, it's the end. That's it. And we are just stardust, which become alive, and then we return to stardust. And whatever happened is forgotten, is no more. So that's to it.
He interviewed a bunch of psychologists, and then he came down and he talked to me because, you know, I had basically an email saying, hey, because David had said something like, you're not going to change the mind of religious fundamentalists. And I'm like, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And that's how Dave and I became friends. But it's like, I found my way out of religion. You found your way out of religion. I can tell the story of kind of how it looks to me in hindsight, but I don't remember, there was not an epiphany. It was not like one day this happened. And it's not like, if I took the period of time, like from 2 months before I identified as an atheist and looked at me 6 months later after I'd identified as an atheist for 4 months, I don't think I knew anything new at all, or nothing significantly new. It's not like there was a new argument or some new problem. It was all stuff I'd read before. And there was just like the weight and the momentum of it got to a point where it's just like, oh, wow, I don't have a good reason to believe.
But you didn't even look further and ask yourself if there were good reasons to believe in the alternative worldview, which is materialism, which is a worldview without God. And you are 15 years into that, Matt, and I have not seen you anywhere, even in one show, asking yourself these kind of questions. If materialism tops theism in explanatory power, and if you put the both propositions, one weighting against the other, then you will see that materialism has basically no explanation whatsoever in regards of origins in any sense, in regards of basically any question and issue, in regards of the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of it, the origin of life, biodiversity. Materialism provides no answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm confused by people who well, it's happened kind of twice in different ways today already, which is people acknowledging that they don't have a good reason to believe, but they keep right on believing. And you're saying you were similar to the last caller.
Well, you make a contrast between people that are believers, which are theists, and then supposedly you are a non-believer or a skeptic. Why do you not go a step further and actually ask yourself, what do you have to believe if there is no God? Because then there comes a whole set of beliefs which you have to endorse, which actually are the consequence of a materialistic worldview. And these are propositions which you cannot prove either, which you have just to take on blind faith. And that is like, what is beyond the universe? How do you know that there is just the matter, that there is just a physical universe, and that there is nothing beyond? And when you say, I am skeptic in regards of a creator, then you automatically endorse the worldview, just matter. And that is a worldview which you only can endorse based on faith.
Yeah.
And it's also newer for you. So I'm just wondering if like
there was a final moment, like a eureka moment where like I started to do what sounds like St. is doing, the kind of questioning and the but that allowed me, it was the debates. It was actively thinking about this specific thing and trying to figure it out. And I guess that moment where I figured out that it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't click anymore. That was mind blowing to me.
All right.
And what does click now, Jenna?
It's one of the things I struggle with because it's like there are things that I don't know how to address with certain people, and people believe for different reasons. They're going to give it up for different reasons. If they're not, we're all kind of hoping against hope for like the magic bullet argument or the piece of evidence that demolishes all superstition and woo, and it's just never going to happen.
No, just the Dunning-Kruger effect was just so strong with me. I just felt like, well, I know there's something.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
Now you don't know anything anymore. You're now just living in ignorance.
And you're right. That's exactly what St. was doing. A number of times when I ask a question, he's like, well, I know this. And it's like somebody would say, I know God loves me. And if you talk to them, and this is something Anthony Magnabosco is great with, is something that street epistemology type stuff and what Dan does on Truth Wanted is very good at doing this. Somebody says, hey, I know that Jesus died for my sins. And you say, what do you mean by that? And they say, oh, I know that Jesus died. Are you saying you know that it happened? Or are you saying you are aware that there is a claim that it happened? And when you start drilling down, what you find is this double usage of the word know, K-N-O-W, as knowledge in the sense of justifiable true belief or reasonably held belief, or however you want to define it in that sense of epistemology. And then there's the second version of know, which is familiarity with. I know that happened. Oh, hang on. Is that knowledge in the same sense? Or are you saying I'm aware of this, or I witnessed this, or I have, it's not always the same. And so people run around saying they know things when they don't.
Well, I know that Christ died on the cross for my sins. I cannot explain it to you. I know it for myself, and each person has to find it out by themselves. But when I say that I know it, it's because the Holy Spirit has confirmed it to me. So I can justifiably say that I know it. It doesn't mean that I can explain to you, that I can prove you what I am saying. I just can testify it. And everyone that experiences it and tries it out can come to that knowledge, because God confirms it to us through his Spirit. But in order to be so, we need to be born again. We need to have a revival, a born again in the Spirit of God, and then God reveals himself to us. And I can truly say that I know that my faith is the true faith, and I know that when I die, I will be in heaven, because God has given his promises, and he is true. He doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Plus, we're prone to exaggeration. I know we're prone to exaggeration. I know that shit happens all the time. I know nobody exaggerates more than Christians.
I never exaggerate.
I've never exaggerated once in my life. I'll never exaggerate in the future after this one. All right, we've got Jack in Canada. You're on with Jenna and Matt. How are you?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. How can we help?
Yeah, I called last time and it just didn't go well because, I started trying to be friendly, but for some reason kind of became hostile.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to preface it the same way, and let's hope it goes well this time, right?
Yeah, good for you for trying again. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I just want to say again, right? I am not against atheists. I'm not trying to come into this space and preach or anything. I'm aware that there are many people who watch this show who, are not necessarily having the best experience with religion, right? And I mean, I don't think like it's fair to come in and, you know, rub it in their nose. That's not me, right? I mean, you know, I respect everybody. I happen to be Roman Catholic. That's part of my identity. But, you know, if you are happier that way, then it's up to you. That's my view. Now, moving on, right?
Do you think that's a good thing, though, Jack? I mean, if somebody's happy being a heroin addict, are you going to say, hey, as long as you're happy, good for you?
Hey, how are you comparing being a believer with being a heroin addict? What a strange and foolish comparison.
Well, yeah, I would consider myself a libertarian.
Okay, cool. Keep going.
Yeah. So now I don't want to speak for any groups as monoliths, but I do believe we have to use some designations, right, to simply make to simply make progress. So I believe that you and Jenna belong to a group that we can call organized secularists. Do you have any objections to identifying you as a part of this group?
Yes.
You do?
I am not in any kind of organized thing like that.
You're part of the atheist community of Austin. So community implies some sort of organization. But I'm happy with you, Jenna. You pick the label for what you and Matt do, and you tell me when you're comfortable with it.
How about we don't even bother with a label? Because I'm not going to object to organized secularist. I'm secularist. I'm somewhat organized, maybe a little disorganized. But can we just drop the labels entirely and talk about whatever the concept is? Because if you can clearly present the concept that you want to address, it doesn't matter what you call it.
Well, no, it does matter because I just want to.
No, it doesn't. No, Jack, this is a non-starter with me. If you can adequately express the concept, it no longer matters what the label is. For example, if I describe to you this device here that I'm holding in my hand, which uses a laser to track its movement around in a table, and that is translated into signals that go into the computer to tell the visual representation of the pointer where to move around on the screen, it doesn't matter whether we call it a mouse or a badabadoo. It's the concept that matters, not the label.
That's correct, but this call is going to be about different expectations people have when it comes to organized religious groups versus organized secularist groups. So that's why it would be better to identify. And that's fine. I'll just move along, right? So I think personally, again, with all due respect to atheists, that atheist groups in general have their expressions have different tolerance level in the eyes of the public than do religious groups, right?
Hang on, Jack.
No, I'm talking, right?
Yeah, no, I'm pausing you, Jack. I'm pausing you. See, that's how that works. I decide when we're going to pause for a second for clarification. So you're saying essentially that atheists, the things that atheists say and do are viewed differently by the public than what religious people say.
No, I'm talking about organized groups, people who are atheist activists. There are many people who, there are many people who lack belief in God, right, that are not in the same group as you are. They're not part of the atheist community. They don't share your values or Jenna's values. So I'm not talking about atheists in general.
Okay,
I'm talking about,
but they're...
No, I'm talking. So the problem is...
Yeah, let him talk.
Can anyone hear me, or is there a problem with my microphone?
I'm waiting for you to get to the point and finish so that I can correct this.
Oh.
Okay. So my point is, right,
so you're not listening. You just are waiting
let's say
for
a
your
Christian
turn.
wrote a
Wow.
book arguing that a Muslim is not a good critical thinker by the virtue of not arriving at the same view that we hold, right? It would be considered, in the eyes of the public in the Western world, pretentious and unbecoming. Whereas for an atheist activist, not just an atheist, but an atheist activist, to make that same point, that all Christians are non-critical thinkers because they don't arrive at the same conclusion, right, is viewed as somewhat enlightened. Or did you understand where I'm sort of leading?
Oh, I know exactly where you're leading, and you're wrong, and absurdly so, because the vast majority of people that make up the public are in fact religious, correct?
I mean, I don't know what the latest polls are, but I assume that more people.
Oh my God! Do you think the world is peopled by a majority of people who believe religious views?
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So stop pretending like you guys are the ones being set aside and victimized and marginalized. Atheists are the one who are marginalized. Are there laws? Now, granted, these aren't currently on the books anymore. They're not valid. But are there laws that would prevent you from running for office?
No, I don't think so. And just
okay. And now I know you're in Canada, but you're aware that the United States, there are places that these laws are no longer. By the way, every atheist out there, you can and should run for office, and you can and should vote. Even though the Constitution of the state of Texas says that no person shall be eligible for public office unless they believe in a higher power, the Supreme Court has ruled that that law does not carry any weight and cannot be used. You, as an atheist, can run, no matter what the Constitution of Texas says. However, Jack, has there been a law, let's just stick with the United States for now, because I don't want to get up on Canada stuff. Has there been a prohibition against Christians running for office?
Well, this certainly has been against Catholics, for example. I'm Catholic. But, the thing is, I object to that happening, too. I mean, I don't understand why...
I don't care what you object to. You called in to basically say that you are in a class of people that are marginalized and put upon and are viewed negatively for your views, and that I'm in some special fucking privileged position where it looks enlightened. You know why it looks enlightened? Because I'm actually not running around saying Christians are delusional. I'm not talking about religion as mental health issues.
Well, this is what you're doing all the time. In each of your shows, you do that.
Doing is addressing the claims and the actual arguments and the evidence and pointing out what is irrational. And what I'm being presented with are fallacies and crybaby whiny tactics, which is what you're doing today.
Well, again, I don't want the us versus them mentality of recasting.
Then you shouldn't have called into your entire call is an us versus them call. Your entire call, what the call screener wrote down that you wanted to talk about was that atheist groups are held to a different standard than religious groups. Your entire call is about us versus them. How dare you suggest that's not why you called?
No, I think that atheist groups, right, are held to different standards. That doesn't mean...
I don't care what you think about atheist groups.
Am I allowed to finish a sentence? Because it looks like...
No, you're not allowed to finish a sentence anymore. Bye.
Yeah. Classical example how you interrupt people that are calling in and you do not permit them to end a sentence, Matt. Typical.
I don't...
Are you there?
Yeah. Always rude.
No.
I didn't hang up on him.
I didn't either.
Oh, well. Guess he's gone. I'm sorry, Jenna.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know why I have to be in some kind of organized group. Like, why I can't just be my own agent. I don't understand.
So the thing is, Jack had called when Shannon and I were on, and we had a talk, and it didn't go particularly well, which is why I wasn't particularly optimistic about this. So this isn't the first time we've had to deal with Jack. And Jack's view is that, Christians are some persecuted group and atheists are not. And he doesn't want, that's why he called in right off the bat. And he doesn't want to be a bigot against atheists, but he thinks we have some privileged position here. And so Jack is actually living two fantasy worlds, one in which there's
to reiterate on something also you said today, I was just...
Keon in California, you're on with Jenna and Matt. How are you?
Hey, I'm all right, man. How are you?
I'm good.
Hello?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so today I was just curious on your guys' opinion, especially yours, because I've been following the show for a while, and to my knowledge, you were like familiar with like the church or something for like 25 years. Don't quote me, I'm just hypothetically. But also, I was just curious as to what you guys were actually talking about, which was, you kind of clarified it a little bit, but I was like in and out of the room, so I didn't get the whole conversation. But what would make a believer, somebody so strong in faith become a non-believer? And just to reiterate on something also you said earlier when you were reading the Bible, and the Bible says this and this and that, how come nobody mentioned discernment? You got to have discernment to understand what you need to. And then whatever is misleading and confusing people, they deserve to get that. It's the reason why they don't have the right knowledge of that water.
How do you know what the right knowledge is of it?
How do I know what the right knowledge is?
I mean, you said discernment.
Well, you know what discernment is, right?
Well, I have a very different view of discernment than what I'm not presuming yours, but what religion generally does, because you talk about like the gift of discernment or having the Holy Spirit guide you to an correct understanding. I instead use my brain and arguments and evidence in order to understand potentially as best as possible what is intended and meant by a passage.
Okay, now that's perfect. And I'm glad you said that, because that's how I feel, but in a different way. And you're very true. Perception is key. So my perception of one word might be different, exactly the same way yours is. And
except that I'm trying to find an objective truth, not just a perception of truth, because your personal truth isn't truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there's a different truth for you than there is for me. There's just truth, and one of us is right or wrong, or both of us are wrong if we disagree.
Yeah, and you are wrong, Matt. That is very clear.
Okay, that's true. Now, is it safe to say that 1 + 1 is 2? That's just not my opinion. That's a collectible truth, right?
For the appropriate values of 1 + = 2, yes, because it depends on, you know, what those terms actually mean. But if you're talking just standard base 10 arithmetic, you know, like any of us, if we said 1 + 1 = 2, yes.
Okay, so it's safe to say if I grab let's say a puppy or two. I got 2 puppies at the house. I gave them food, I gave them shelter, I gave them water. Is it safe to say that I created this for them, this environment for them to live in, that my animals? Yeah, right.
You created the environment.
What? Are you making them feel safe?
Listen, ma'am. Hypothetically, I created an environment for my 2 puppies. I got a nice backyard. I got them food. I got them water. I got them shelter. These are my animals. Is it safe to say that I created that environment for my animal? Have you ever had an animal?
You're saying if you created an environment, did you create an environment? Yes.
Right. So how is it that people can be on Earth with food, shelter, water, and if we didn't even have one thing, it's even like bees. If all the bees left, extinction in humans. If we were too far to the sun or too close, or even if one of the planets were out of alignment, this is too much perfection. Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about you created an environment for those dogs, you didn't create the environment. You're sharing the environment that you inhabit and sharing your resources. It's not like you created an environment. Now, colloquially, we'll say, yeah, you created it. But you didn't create the dog food, you didn't create the yard, you didn't create any of it. You're just sharing the space that you are currently occupying with another creature, right?
Yeah, but I created a doghouse. I did that. I built it out of
my... you built a doghouse. That is, we know that you built a doghouse, and you know that you built a doghouse. That's not anything at all like the Earth.
Right, which is way more divine.
No, it's not. Keon, you don't just get to say something is divine. You need to demonstrate that it's divine. And
no, I don't have to demonstrate it. The evidence is there. The planet Earth is finely tuned to host life, and there are many conditions which have to be just right in order to life to be able to flourish. This is amazing evidence of creation, and you just don't acknowledge it because you're biased against creationism.
There's nothing at all on Earth that is analogous to the doghouse that you're using in your example. There's no being or anything else that created a place for me to live.
Well, that is just a baseless claim. You cannot prove it that we are just here by random accidents and chance. That's a faith-based claim, and it is clear where the caller is going, and he is right. The analogy is maybe not so fortunate, but the logic behind what he wants to say is correct.
Other than what I've paid for on my own.
Okay, well then because I ask my homie this all the time, and I guess he said I said it with it. I don't know last time to you, but I don't know. we got to a bad start. This is going to be clear as day. Please let me try to explain. This is my last curiosity question. So my friend keeps telling me evolution, okay, is the reason why humans are here or whatever this and that. Okay, cool, understandable. But what I would like to understand, right? In today's generation, we are so disconnected from nature and so dependent on Western civilization, medicine, and all that stuff that the babies are even weaker than before. And even in the
No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not. Stop listening to what your friend says about evolution and go study what science says about evolution. Stop suggesting that we're somehow so disconnected from nature and dependent on medicine that babies are weaker. You live right now in the best of all possible times with regard to healthcare, knowledge, longevity, and quality of life. Undeniably, that is just a fact.
That's true. And the baby still can't pop out the pussy and raise itself up to walk around and eat and talk. So what I'm trying to understand is the first humans.
What difference does it make if a baby can pop out and take care of itself from the get-go? That might, I mean, please tell me how that has to do with anything you've said.
That something raised.
What?
Something raised us. That's my point. I'm trying to ask you.
We are creatures, Keon. We are creatures who have.
So you're just over talking to the guy which is calling in. Typical.
To raise and rear our young and protect them. There are other models. There are other animals that do it that way, where they protect and care for the young until they're able to take care of themselves. There are others that take care of themselves immediately.
We're not.
The fact that there are different creatures who do it different. Keon, if you're not going to listen, we're done.
Yeah.
All right, good.
He has to listen, but you interrupt him all the time, Matt.
Yeah, I'm listening.
What difference does it make? So human beings give live birth to young that they must then nurture for some period of time before those young are able to live on their own. There are other species that give birth to live young and other young that they do the same thing. And then there are other species that just throw their offspring out there and they take care of themselves from the get-go. So what we have is a bunch of different ways of managing life. Agreed?
No, I don't agree because
you don't agree that it's a fact that there are some creatures that have to raise their young and some creatures that don't.
Yeah, I agree on that. But
and that's what I said. You got to pay attention to what I'm actually saying, and you can't just be waiting for your turn to.
I just want to stay on topic. I understand other animals and all that.
I'm trying to stay on topic.
Wow.
I'm trying to stay on topic.
Wow. Let him talk.
So I would like you to address how a minute ago, when you talked about how a baby can't just pop out a pussy and take care of itself, what the fuck that had to do with anything?
Right. That evidence of whatever first humans were crawling around evidently had something that was not a human or a baby to teach us to how to be a man. You get what I'm saying?
No.
Neither do I.
No?
No.
So people keep talking about evolution. Once I see babies come out and they can walk around and pick up after themselves, then maybe they might evolve. But I just want to see, listen, go back.
No. Stop, Keon. Please, Keon, I will buy you a fucking book on evolution if you would just promise to read it and think about it. Because what you're describing is when you think evolution happens to individuals after they're born. Evolution doesn't address individuals at all. Evolution affects populations. It's not, hey, do you realize, for example, that Spanish and Italian are both languages that were derived originally from people who spoke Latin, right?
Of course. I know a lot about history. They taught in school. You
know a lot about languages, right? So Latin was a...
So what does that have to do with biological evolution or with development of life, of biodiversity? It has nothing to do with it.
Language, and different people who spoke Latin went off and moved to different areas, and that one version of Latin evolved into Spanish, and one version of Latin evolved into Italian, right?
Right.
I guess it's safe to say, sir, that you don't understand my question.
I know what it's safe to say is you won't answer my fucking question. Are you aware that Spanish and Italian were both derived from the original Latin language?
Yeah, etymology, sir. I'm sure I'm familiar with etymology, yes.
Well, then maybe if you'd answer the question, I wouldn't have to ask it three
I
times.
just said yes. You got. What are you asking me, sir? Am I familiar with?
What? If you let me ask, I'm going to ask you. Was there ever a Latin speaking mother who gave birth to a Spanish speaking child?
Did a Latin like a Mexican? Probably, yeah.
Okay, goodbye, you ignorant jackass with your did a Latin lady fuck a Mexican. Go fuck yourself, Keon, and never ever call this show again. Block his number. Did a Latin woman fuck a Mexican.
Well, Matt, that's the kind of callers that you deserve.
Keon, you're so monumentally ignorant. It's just embarrassingly bad. All right, so we got a quick tech issue here. Where there's only like 5 minutes left in the show. I'm going to try to get through at least one more call here. My apologies to anybody who doesn't get through today and with various tech issues today. I've got Michael in California who claims to have scientific evidence for God. So I'm intrigued. What is this evidence, Michael? How are you?
Hello, Matt. Hello, Jenna. This is ironic, Matt, because this is the Michael from San Diego that when you didn't like Bayesian probability and Einstein and Spinoza and decided that you were, when it comes to God, etc. I'm sure you remember the conversation.
I didn't hear what you just said, and I don't remember the conversation you're talking about. So who are you again?
Oh, I called probably about 3 weeks ago, and I got you right on the tail end, just like now, when things were getting a little frustrating, apparently.
Well,
I brought up
call earlier.
Probability and Einstein and Spinoza.
Yeah.
And you remember that?
Hello? All righty. All right, we have Kendall in Washington who wants to finish me off on slavery. How are you, Kendall?
Exodus 21:16 and 1 Timothy 1:10 disprove your claim that the Bible condones slavery.
No, they don't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. Exodus 21:16 is about kidnapping people. It's not about whether or not people can be property. In the very same fucking chapter where it says don't. Oh my God. Are you going to listen or are you going to talk?
Go ahead.
Exodus 21:16 says anyone who kidnaps someone should be put to death. Slavery is not kidnapping.
That's what they did back in the day, silly. That's what Africans did.
Hey, silly. Slavery is not the same as kidnapping. And the Bible, in the very same book and chapter, allows slavery, does it not?
No.
It doesn't?
I've been trying to tell you. No, it does not. I just gave you the verses.
What's your favorite version of the Bible?
Read the entire.
What is your favorite fucking version of the Bible, Kendall?
King James.
King James. I'm going to pull up the King James. And you said Exodus 21:16, correct?
Exodus 21:16 and 1 Timothy 1:10.
No, I don't need to go to 1 Timothy yet. We're going to start with Exodus 21:16. Have you got your Bible open? Do you have your Bible open?
Well, what are you defining slavery? Just want to make sure. Not that it matters. I mean,
slavery is the owning of another person, another human being, as property.
As property.
Correct.
Okay. All right, good. Keep going. All right. Here.
You're saying the Bible doesn't sanction that?
Of course not. I just gave you one of the verses. I can give you more.
So you're saying the Bible does not say that you can own human beings as property?
No, you didn't read the entire Exodus 20:16.
I did read the Exodus 21. It's 21:16, not 20:16.
Chapter 21:16. And anyone who steals or kidnaps another and either sells him or still has him when he is caught must be put to death.
Yeah, that's about stealing a person. That's not slavery.
That is it. In possession. That's what it means.
No. Do you realize that kidnapping and slavery are two different things?
That was what they did back in the day. They're not. It's part
Do
of.
you think that they didn't kidnap people back in the day?
It wasn't just kidnapping; it's selling them as well.
Kendall,
That's why it's slavery.
Kendall, are you going to listen to me, or am I going to hang up?
Go.
So, Exodus 21:16 says that you're not supposed to kidnap people. However, Exodus 21 sanctions slavery, as does Leviticus 25, for example, where Leviticus 25, verse 45, says, moreover, the children of strangers that do sojourn among you, of them ye shall buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possessions. And ye shall take it as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as possessions. They shall be your bondmen forever.
Yeah. And what did I say?
Slavery.
Leviticus chapter 25, 9, 10. They were free. They set them free right afterwards.
Kendall, did you not just read along with me where it says they will be your bondsmen forever?
It wasn't forever. It was just.
It was forever. It literally says forever. Leviticus 21.
That was that.
Kendall, you're not listening and you're not paying attention. But Leviticus 25. No, you're not. Leviticus 25 says that they're your property forever. Exodus 21 tells you exactly who you can enslave, how you have to let your Hebrew slaves go after 7 years, and everybody gets let go after 50 years in the Jubilee, but that you can trick your Hebrew slaves into becoming your slave forever. Are you aware of that one? It's in the same fucking chapter. Have you not read all of Exodus 21? Exodus 21.
Absolutely. It's not.
If a servant comes and says, I love my master and my wife and children, and I don't want to go free, then his master.
Exactly.
Kendall,
that's choice.
Kendall, you have no interest in
slavery.
Oh my God. Kendall, will you be my slave under the rules of Exodus 21?
Well, you giving me the choice. I certainly would.
No. I'm asking you if you will be my slave. Once you become my slave, the choice is no longer yours. I will be able to beat you because that's allowed in Exodus 21.
No, it does not. That's not true.
It's not true?
It does not verbatim.
Open your
say
Bible.
You can be slave. Verbatim.
Open your Bible.
Verbatim, you can be slave.
Kendall,
Does it say verbatim?
Kendall, if you're going to lie about your Bible and not play fair, I'm going to hang up on you.
Are you a biblical scholar?
Yes, motherfucker, way more than you are, because I can actually read it to you, and I wanted you to read along. Exodus 21:20, anyone who beats their male or female slaves with a rod must be punished if the slave dies, but they are not to be punished if the slave lives a day or two, because the slave is their property. Exodus 21, the same chapter, only 4 and 5 verses past your thing about kidnapping. Exodus 21:16 is about kidnapping. Exodus 21:20 and 21 says that you can beat your slaves as long as they don't die within a day or two, because they are your property. I'm sorry.
That does not verbatim say that.
Wow.
I'm talking about it's you're specifying.
Wow.
Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen?
Oh,
are you watching this show?
Look at the screen. No, I'm not. They told me not to.
Okay, then don't.
I know what you're talking about. It doesn't say specifically verbatim.
I just fucking read it to you verbatim. Anyone who beats...
You can be slaves.
Wow, you don't let him talk, huh?
Yes, Exodus 21:20.
Say that.
Kendall, you are a dishonest liar. Go open your Bible. If you'd read it, you'd know this. Everybody, every single person on the planet who's following along can read this for themselves. Go to BibleGateway.com. I have a stack of Bibles off to my left, and every one of them says what I just told you. You don't know what you're talking about, Kendall. You are confused. You don't know your Bible. You don't care about what the truth is. You just wanted to call in and hear yourself talk. Congratulations.
Wow.
You were successful.
Wow. Isn't that what you are doing, Matt? You didn't even let the guy finish a complete sentence. You have interrupted him all the time. Typical.
Kendall, you read it to us. You read it from King James, from your version. You read it to us verbatim. Read it verbatim.
Okay. All right. Not with a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. It doesn't say you can beat slaves.
Go one verse north of that. Go read verse 20.
Verse 20? Verse 20.
It's one verse above the one you just read. How can you be having a problem finding it? I don't think you're legit. I think you're a troll. Read 21:20 right now.
I looked at 21. Okay. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with their rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. Yeah. But sure, well, that doesn't say you can beat slaves. It doesn't say you can beat.
Fucking Christ. You're not
It says you can beat slaves as long as they don't die.
Done. He literally just read it out, the same words I did. It literally says you can beat your slaves as long as they don't die within a day. That's all the patience that I have for today, and we're past the 6 o'clock hour. I'm sorry that you had a little hiccup at the end, Jenna, because I would much rather let you have him read it and we go back and forth.
I wanted to talk about that.
I hope I never hear from him again. I don't think he's real. I have more respect for humanity and people than to think that someone is stupid enough and confused enough to be able to read that verse back to us verbatim, say that it doesn't say what it actually says, and that person is also smart enough to find and be able to call into a program. I don't even think a person that dumb could tie their fucking shoes, let alone, this is not real. This is, it says you can't kidnap people, and it doesn't say you can't beat them, and then he reads the verse that says you can beat them.
The tone of voice, the whole, oh, I gotcha, like that right there is just so cringy. Like it's just not honest. It's not nice. It's not what I would have called Christian.
Yeah, it's embarrassingly bad. And the thing is, every biblical scholar knows exactly what those verses say. They know what it says in Exodus 20. They know what it says in Leviticus 25, and they know what it says in Deuteronomy as well. The Bible has a very bad take on slavery, which is why even some of the worst Christian apologists, like Ray Comfort, when he called in, and I tried to get him to address what the Bible says about slavery, his response was, he never said he believed everything in the Bible. He'd rather pretend that part of the Bible is wrong than have to deal with that issue. It's the reason I bring it up. It says it very clearly. Exodus 21, Leviticus 25, to Deuteronomy, which I'm forgetting right now. Yeah, if that person is real, they're beyond conversation. They're beyond reason or discussion. But I don't think they are. I've been on the internet long enough to know that was more likely to be somebody who just wanted to call in. Maybe they're looking for a clip or whatever. On that note, thank you very much, Jenna. I enjoyed being with you today. I hope you're having a good day and things are improving for everybody else out there. Please take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Follow the health and safety guidelines in your area, depending on how your area is dealing with the pandemic.
Okay. Hi,
Hey,
Tony.
what's up, Anthony? A lot of feedback noise.
I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, what a joke. Two clowns, both of them.
Yeah, I tried to figure out how I can better the feedback noise and lower it, but I have no
A lot
idea
of
how to
feedback
do it.
noise. Yeah, I'd like Paul to come in. Paul, I want to come in and talk to you about the origin of life. Yeah, it is your foundation, Paul. It definitely is. You got to get life from non-life, and it's never been shown once. Just because you haven't heard of it, that doesn't mean it's not your foundation. You haven't heard of it because you don't study science. They can't make it happen in the laboratory. You know, Antangelo, all these internet atheists that say abiogenesis is not part of atheism, what a joke.
Well, of course, it is very relevant question.
Very relevant.
Yeah. If life cannot come from natural by natural means, of course, then materialism is not substantiated.
Getting a lot of feedback noise.
Someone said that it's better now. I don't know.
Yeah, but Paul, you got to get life through naturalistic mechanisms, and they can't even show it in the lab under contrived conditions. They can't even do it. You know, and Tangela, I would love to see you debate Matt on the origin of life.
Yeah.
Maybe disconnect your mic, Tangelo.
Yeah, it's the headphone together with the microphone. So I don't know if that solves the problem.
I'll try to come back in. Yeah, I don't know, it's bad. I can barely hear you.
You cannot hear me? Can you hear me better now? Better now? How can you hear me now better? Hmm. Well, I don't know what to do. Is it better now? Yeah, Tony. Still bad
Yeah, man.
sound.
It's good now. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, you got to have a naturalistic origin if you're an atheist. You have to, life has to come from non-life. So it's a problem.
Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, hello? Aunt Angelo?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Shalom. I hear you, brother. Shalom.
I can't hear anything now. Hello?
Hey, do you not hear me? I hear you. So, I just wanted to tell the community that the call we just saw with Matt Dillahunty, that's an example of why we have to be prepared and be a good example to others, because we're on the debate front of things, you know, so we're the first one with these arguments. We really have to be a good example into the rest of the church and the internet community and stuff. That, yeah, you're allowed to beat your slave in the Bible. When you have slaves, sometimes it's necessary to beat them because they didn't have a prison system. And prison systems are really brutal and horrible for people. So, yeah, it's not like there's a better solution today. But since they didn't have prison systems, in certain circumstances, slaves had to be beaten. So it had to be permissible to beat slaves. It's really that
Hello?
simple.
Hello?
Hey, Otangelo, we hear you. And so, yeah, since it's that simple, we just need to share that with people. People, they need to own up that the Israelites had slaves, and that was a lot of how survival was done back then. And the fact that slaves could be beaten because that was sometimes necessary, that wasn't any kind of indication that they should be beaten when it's unnecessary. And obviously, people were not kidnapped into slavery to the Israelites. So when it talks about people traveling, you could buy from nomads or whoever was traveling through.
Can you hear me, Nick?
Yeah, I hear you, Tony.
Must be on Tangelo's sound. Yeah. No, I agree with you on the slavery. Some of those callers just don't explain it well. And Matt drowns them out, you know.
Yeah, and another argument that I use for slavery, just to sort of put it in perspective for others, is that I'm a slave to Christ and I wouldn't have it any other way. So that proves that when slavery is done right, it's a good thing.
Well, people that owed a debt. Is that what you're...
Well, that makes a lot of sense because he died for us to ransom us. And so we have been purchased with a price, as Paul wrote.
Right. Well, look at the military. People voluntarily join our prison system. They work. They don't get paid.
Yeah, and they're property of the state in our prison system.
Paul, why don't you come in, man? Let's talk about it. What would be your best evidence for how the universe got here? You know it wasn't God. You know that. So what was it? Some sort of infinite universe generating mechanism that wasn't God, right? Yeah, I was just talking with Paul.
Yeah, because unfortunately it is true on that last call. Dillahunty had a point that the guy was not willing to own up to what the Bible said. He was trying to say the Bible didn't say what it said. And
Yeah.
Matt was in a very evil mood by then. So it got pretty bad. And I think sometimes in our community with some of the stuff we're saying in side chat and maybe with how a couple people conduct themselves in debates, that when we're being harsh and we're really calling people out, that we need to do it just right. We shouldn't be throwing around foul language just to make it more kind of rubbing it in or abusive, you know? It should be...
It's mostly what the atheists do, start cursing.
Yeah, so the idea is about how stupid it is. We should be very direct there. And, you know, with people who are public figures lying to the public, then we call them out harder, which is some of what's going on with, say, like a godless engineer. Or I did a boom video on some stuff that Ned said. But even there, like, I didn't put Ned's name or his channel name or anything in the description and stuff. His image was behind the explosion and stuff, but the video was titled Subjective Morality Self-Destructs. So I kept it about the ideas mostly. And then, and in the video, I was shouting about how stupid he was being because he was saying that abortion is atrocious. But then because this is the first time humanity's had technology to do it in a way that's safe for the woman, that we would expect for humans to do it and that we have to grow past that problem time. So he thinks that we're going to come to a point where abortions are no longer happening on any kind of wide scale when humans progress. And then I was, we had the solution 2,000 years ago, and that's what we were trying to tell him. So his whole idea that we're going to get there someday while babies are being murdered, like, it's just horrible, you know? He should really hear us out and see what Christ has to offer.
Paul, I don't know why you come into these chats then if you're so neutral. You have no evidence for the naturalistic origin. God is impossible. So what? I don't know what you get out of even coming in here. It's just to type and make noise, right? You're bored. It's late at night. I mean, there's no proof for infinite universes. There's no proof for abiogenesis. God is impossible, correct? So it's like, you know, Nick, some of these atheists, they have no arguments for really anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We enjoy the community here, and I think some of them are sort of mooching off of what Christ has built. This community would be nothing without Christ.
Yeah.
And it could lose like half of us, and there'd still be like a stream going on to spend some fun time on, maybe half as often, but you know. But if there was no Christ, there'd be nothing here. And a lot of what goes on, like with human rights and stuff, has a lot to do with that too, you know. The elitists, after 1,500 years of not doing things Christ's way, they finally make a few concessions to the people, and they call it the Enlightenment. And then, the real Enlightenment was a real one, not just a stupid little throw a dog a bone. And the real Enlightenment happened 2,000 years ago on the cross. And so they, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. And the rain is a good thing. In ancient culture, you want rain for your crops and stuff, unless you get like totally flooded out or something. But typically rain is just always a good thing. So when it says the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, and Christ is the light of the world, the propitiation not only for the sins of Christians, but also of the entire world. And he shines in darkness, and darkness does not overcome him. So his light does shine in the whole world, and the whole world benefits. And I'm glad to have them here in our community. But hopefully, we're some flawed people, but hopefully we're getting better with time. And hopefully they will see how real Christ is. As we put more and more focus on him.
Yeah, Paul, you're really an agnostic then. You have no argument either way. You have no evidence for infinite universes or abiogenesis, but you're pretty convinced that God's impossible. It's just like these dumb positions that these atheists argue from, you know?
Yeah. And we have a huge advantage because our position is true.
The genetic information argument is our strongest argument. And we're proving that in the lab year after year, that the only way to generate genetic code is through intelligent agency.
Wait, so is that even stronger than the fact of that chemicals don't form into complexifying systems?
The desired structures that we need, yes, correct.
Because the only reputations I've seen regarding abiogenesis are like way out of context, like citing post-biotic sources for things. I don't know if you guys saw. I watched Otangelo's stream on it, but he calls himself Professor Dan, and he went to like refute James Tour, and he took it totally out of context using machines that use life to generate the biotic molecules necessary.
What he said was
nothing to do with the abiogenesis thing, and then said that James Tour didn't specify, and he thought James Tour was trying to be dishonest. James Tour goes into detail in a lot of his explanations, and he doesn't assume his audience is stupid, which is extremely different from Professor Dan and how he treats his audience and how he sees his audience.
He's arrogant guy, and and his argument using a DNA sequencer was pathetic. So you have to purify all these chemicals and then run them through a designed machine, and then you get code.
Yeah, and then
how would that happen on the early Earth?
Well, that, and you have to use life in order to like farm those things.
You have to use pre-existing enzymes. Pre-existing enzymes are used in all those experiments. So it's a bunch of garbage.
And we know that life does overcome standard entropy. That's what shows that it's a designed system. One of the strongest reasons we know it's a designed system is because it overcomes the facts of it's a system that overcomes what would normally happen with the chemistry and does something totally different with it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
uses a bunch of mechanical and physical processes also.
Yeah, Paul, we don't believe in abiogenesis. We don't believe in your garbage. So give us some convincing evidence.
Or a third hypothesis, if you have one besides abiogenesis and theogenosis, which is life from God, because God is alive, so that wouldn't be
aliens. They have their panspermia nonsense. But where did the aliens come from? Then you have an infinite regress of problems.
Yeah, you still have to get to the point where chemicals at some point were not acted upon by life. And but my point about Professor Dan is that he took Dr. Tour out of context and tried to call Dr. Tour a liar when he was really being very dishonest with the whole idea that Dr. Tour was lying.
He didn't refute him. And using a DNA sequencer machine is designed equipment that would never be available on the early Earth. There's no natural mechanisms that's going to produce that code, not even with time.
Yeah, and it was a lot of ad hom, just trying to make Dr. Tour look bad through rhetoric and which was because he didn't go into specific claims about specific experiments and then showing that Dr. Tour was somewhere being dishonest or something.
Right.
And
he's arrogant. He's an arrogant guy. I'd love to see a live debate.
It was just extremely weak.
Yep.
Well, I intend to do a video against Dr. Dan based on that, and against GE. And or did I say Dr. Dan? I meant Professor Dan, right? That is what or is he Professor Dave? It's Dave, huh? Dan's the
other guy.
Yeah. But Professor Dave is who I meant this whole time, not Dan. So if anyone thought I meant creation myths, I did not. I meant Professor Dave.
I don't waste time with Dan because he even admits he's not a biochemist. He doesn't know anything.
Yeah, so and there was a third person, I forgot who it is, but some of these people who've been blatantly dishonest.
Yep.
And then I mean, in Godless Engineer's case, his dishonesty was shown, and then he didn't apologize or anything. He just used more dishonesty to try to dance around it.
Yeah, and Paul, so you're using naturalism of the gaps. That's what abiogenesis is. Naturalism of the gaps. Chemicals do not self-assemble into life. You have no examples. So you're in the world of belief yourself.
Well, Paul, it's not possible. The science has not confirmed that life from non-life by unguided natural means is possible. Science is trying for 70 years, and rather than coming closer to give an explanation, it just demonstrates how unlikely and impossible it is. And just the odds to have a meaningful genome for a minimal cell is 1 to 10 to 700,000 of power. That's far beyond what is possible. So
then they would say, no, you're talking about a modern cell. We're talking about primitive cells that don't need proteins.
Yeah, but you know, Tony, that they take mycoplasma as an example, and mycoplasma is not a free living cell. It is a pathogen which doesn't produce the amino acids which it requires. It just gets them through the external environment, through feeding of the host. So that is not a good example. And if you take a free living cell, it has 1.3 million nucleotides for making all the amino acids which are required. And if you calculate the odds to have that kind of information, it's extremely a small probability. It's 1 to the 10 to the 700,000. So and there's another problem. I did write an article today on that. Even if, let's suppose that a string of nucleotides would form on the prebiotic earth and would be information, if you don't have the machinery to transcribe and translate the information and make proteins, so that has no meaning. It's the same as to have a hard disk, but not a computer where you can use the information to make something with it.
Okay, no problem. I just take the amino acids and I run them through a protein sequencing machine. There you go. Done. Solved it.
Yeah, that was really ridiculous by Professor Day.
And I'd like to say that abiogenesis does have an answer. It's not possible. And so it's not really an of the gaps argument when we say abiogenesis is not possible, because a minimum system, in order to let chemicals reproduce and do complexification, chemicals cannot form into that minimal system. That is not a possibility. We know enough about chemistry to know that. And
Agreed.
so, and we know enough about, anyway, it's not an of the gaps argument. So you would need a third hypothesis, because abiogenesis is not on the table. And we're really past pretending it is on the table.
And there is no third hypothesis. There are just two options. One is intelligent design, and the second one is random unguided events on the prebiotic earth, just the scrambling of chemical reactions and to look what happens. That's the two options. There isn't a third option. And someday bring in a physical necessity or even chemical evolution, but there was no natural selection. There was nothing to select. Molecules, they do not have the urge to select something with the goal to make life.
Yeah, exactly.
So
You got it.
if you
You gotta
really
have faith.
face the fact that the molecules, they are totally impotent to bring up the complexity that is required to make a minimal cell, then this is a checkmate. This is a knockout argument in regards of materialism. But of course, atheists, they do not want to admit that.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. They use pre-prepared synthetic kits with purified molecules and reagents. It's all strict protocols and procedures, and it's all been pre-prepared.
Yeah, Paul writes here. I didn't say I did. I've also just said it's possible a God did it. I just don't believe that a God did do it. When you say that, Paul, when you say that you don't believe God did it, then you are left with chance. And it takes much more faith to believe that chance can bring up the complexity seen in a living cell, that chance can make blueprints, machines, and factories rather than design. So, hey, if you want to believe in chance, be it, but it is not a rational proposition.
Not only that, but the biomechanics and biosystems and the maintaining and the running and even the informational bureaucracy of bio correlation for, say, like a human body or something. I mean, it's just so far beyond all of humanity. Just for like one human to exist is so far beyond the human world. It's yeah, the whole idea that chemicals for with that chemicals assemble into doing that.
It's
We
not
know
going to
that that's
happen.
impossible. Yeah.
Not going to happen. That's pretty much it. Yeah, I think one of you guys should call out Professor Dave or Maddox or somebody. Get a debate or discussion.
No, I invited Professor Dave even before this episode when he had debated Kent Hovind, and he just didn't reply. So he likes to take the big guys, you know. So, but I mean, it's funny that he says that James Tour isn't qualified to opine in regards of abiogenesis, but Professor Dave isn't a biochemist; he is a biologist, as far as I know, actually. So, why does he think that he is more qualified to give an opinion in regards of the origin of life?
Yeah. Yeah, but SFT, you got to debate. You got to start debating people on abiogenesis, brother. You did plenty on evolution. If you're gonna go against up Dave and some of these other guys, you gotta nail them on the origin of life, dude.
Well, I mean, is Dave going to debate at all? Does he
I
debate?
think SFT said he backed out.
Because Dave seems like he just does like propaganda, basically. So he uses what his audience doesn't know to get away with saying things that just aren't true. And so that's not really rigorous enough for debate. Someone has to have better game than that.
Definitely. And, you know, I don't see enough abiogenesis debates. Antangelo had a good one. But SFT doesn't have really any.
Well, if you go and check, I did make many comments on Professor Dave's video. And when he sees that someone brings up something that he doesn't like, he simply makes the profile invisible, and then it doesn't show up anymore, you know. So rather than to be honest and actually respond to the criticism, he selects to whom he wants to respond, and the ones that he cannot respond, he just mutes them and makes them invisible. And I mean, that's not honest.
I hear you, SFT. We still love you, brother.
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, let me. On a skeptical question, could God have created the laws of physics and chemistry such that abiogenesis could have happened with deep time? Well, the problem is that deep time doesn't help to create life. It is actually an enemy, both in regards of the origin of life and also in regards of evolution.
I think another answer might be that if on the chemical level and the physical level that could happen, then like chemistry and physics would just be totally rogue. So I don't think the universe would function anymore.
Okay, I can maybe put what I wrote today in regards of what Mikey Spaghetti Alien is asking, and I can put it for everyone to read. So let me check that out. Just a moment, you can keep talking until I find what I wrote today.
But standing, that's their foundation. If you got to go right to their foundation. Abiogenesis is their foundation, without a doubt. as much as they'll deny that and say it's not connected to evolution.
Yeah, if you don't have a good explanation in regards of abiogenesis, then how do you substantiate materialism? You can't.
Exactly.
Okay. I'll just have it on the screen, just a moment. Let me put that out here.
Brother Standing, there's plenty of scenarios. You got the RNA world, metabolism first, protocells. I mean, there's hundreds of papers every year coming out on abiogenesis, and they all fail, brother.
Yeah, that brings up another false reputation that Dave tried to make against Dr. Tour, which was about the he used an example of little capsules, and they're the closest things that humans have made to a protocell. And then
Right.
Dave took it out of context and was talking about the purpose of the experiment wasn't about making a protocell or something. It doesn't matter, but it's still the closest thing humans have ever made to a protocell. That's what Tour said, so that the audience would know that we've never come anywhere close. He was just sharing facts. And so it was just another very dishonest, out of context, trying to accuse Dr. Tour. So yeah, I'll have to do one devoted just to Dave and like pointing out just how dishonest and skeezy it is. And
Right.
yeah, I think I'm pretty well prepared for that. I've been paying a lot of attention to Dr. Tour, and it's only like a couple hours of stuff. I can just watch it if I want to prepare more.
Well, Paul, you say showing a God it would take down my lack of belief. This is a silly requirement which will never be met. And that is what I see very frequently, that atheists, they do not have developed a solid epistemological framework in order to investigate origins. And many atheists, they come and ask, oh, show me God, demonstrate God's existence, and I will believe. And that is silly, because it will not happen. And I always reply and say, well, demonstrate that the material world is all there is. They can't do that either. So that kind of question and requirement and challenge will bring you nowhere.
Agreed.
That will bring you nowhere. So you need to know how you investigate origins. And I think abductive reasoning to the best explanation is the right way to go. And then you put both propositions on a weight, and you have on the one side the proposition that there is a God, and on the other side the proposition that there is no God. And then you check which of the two claims bears more evidence, and how the evidence in the natural world fits better to either one or the other explanation. And then you need to know, are there signatures of intelligence in the natural world? And if there are things that only intelligence can do, which material causes cannot do, then of course the evidence leads us to propose intelligent design as the better explanations. And that's indeed what we see, because I mean, if you check life, what are the odds to have life by unguided means? It's astronomically small possibility. And at the same time, we see purposeful design in biology. We see things that are made with specific purposes. When a scientist checks what happens inside of the cell and he sees a molecule or a protein that he doesn't understand what it does, the first thing that he asks is, what is the purpose of that protein? And that is what contrasts the living from the non-living. A stone and its form has no specific purpose, but the protein has a purpose. So this is a very important contrast. And as soon as you imply that there is purpose for something, then you have to ask, well, why does something natural have purpose, and does that lead to design? And in fact, proteins are molecular machines with specific purposes. So, and blueprints, that is the genetic code and the information stored in the gene, has a purpose to specify the making of proteins. So we see purpose in the living. And that is very strong evidence of design. So the evidence in the natural world leads to intelligent design as the better explanation than random chance.
Absolutely. What is the minimal amount of proteins? I still wanted, because that's their, they think that's their strongest argument on Tangelo, that they can somehow get to a very small level of information with a protocell and call that life or a precursor.
Yeah. Let me check here. I'll tell it to you. Just a moment. I forgot the name of that bacteria. It is Pelagibacter ubique. It has 1,354 proteins. That is the minimum to have a free living bacteria, which can synthesize all the basic building blocks required for life. So that's a huge amount, and you have an average size of about 400 amino acids for each protein, and then you have to calculate the odds to have that size of genome, or if it wasn't specified by a genome but just randomly assembled amino acids randomly assembling on the prebiotic curve, then you have to calculate what the odds are, and they are really astronomical.
What do you think about what Brother Standing is saying? Brother Standing, I would say if you could demolish abiogenesis, you don't have nothing, man. That's it. You go right to the origin of life. They can't get that going. They can't get that first step going, even in the lab under contrived conditions. So right there, it's game over, brother.
So here, Tony, the simplest free-living bacteria is Pelagibacter ubique. It is known to be one of the smallest and simplest self-replicating and free-living cells. It has a complete biosynthetic pathway for all 20 amino acids. These organisms get by with about 1,300 genes, about 1.3 million base pairs, and code for 1,354 proteins. They survive with any dependence on other life forms. So that is a model organism that we need, the smallest free-living life form, which this bacteria is an example. And if you make the calculation, you come to odds of 1 to 10 to the 722 power, and there are 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. So we can truly say this kind of odds is in the realm of the absolutely impossible.
Absurd.
It's either created or not created. Disproving evolution still wouldn't mean it was created. Well, Paul, if you disprove abiogenesis, then it is in fact a proof that it was created. We can come to that conclusion by eliminative abductive reasoning, where when one proposition is false, then the other must be true. And that's exactly one of the reasons why intelligent design is substantiated, because abiogenesis is not possible, and the other alternative is intelligent design. So we only have that alternative, so it must be intelligent design.
That's it, Standing. Me and you are having a debate, brother.
Okay, so what happens when you debate a theistic evolutionist, such as Inspiring Philosophy or Francis Collins, who admit abiogenesis is false and God sparked the first life? What do you debate next? Well, I have a site in regards of what I think explains biodiversity. I can put the link. I don't know if SFT has seen it, where I give an alternative explanation. I don't just say abiogenesis, actually evolution is false, but I give an alternative explanation to evolution, and I can read it for you.
Who's the mighty spaghetti alien? Come on in the chat, dude.
Okay, here we go. The real mechanisms that explain biodiversity and complex organismal architecture are billions of bits, incredible amounts of data, instructions, complex codified specifications, information, algorithms masterfully encoded in various genetic and daunting epigenetic languages and communication channels and networks. Genes, but as well and specifically especially various striking epigenetic signaling and bioelectric codes through various signaling networks provide cues to molecules and macromolecule complexes, and ingenious scaffold networks interpret and react in a variety of ways upon decoding and data processing of those instructions. Since signaling pathways work masterfully in a synergetic integrated manner, with the transcriptional regulatory network and complex short and long-range crosstalk between cells, these crucial instructions, crucial for advanced life forms, could not be the result of random gradual increase of information. These superb information networks only operate and work in an integrated fashion and had to be born and fully set up right from the beginning, conveying codes, a system of rules to convert information such as letters and words into another form, and translation ciphers of one language to another are always sourced back to intelligent setup. What we see in biochemistry is incredibly complex instructional codified information being stored through the genetic code codons in a masterful information storage molecule DNA, encoded DNA polymerase, sent messenger RNA, and decoded by the ribosome, as well as epigenetic codes and languages, and several signaling pathways. The morphogenesis of organismal structure and shape is classified into two groups: the various instructional codes and languages using molecules that provide complex instructional cues of action based on information through signaling, and secondly, by force-generating molecules that are precisely directed through those signals, which are responsible for fantastic cell morphogenesis. Blueprints, instructional information, and master plans, which permit the striking autonomous self-organization and control of complex machines, molecular machines, and exquisite factory park cells, upon these are both always tracked back to an intelligent source which made both for purposeful specific goals. That brings us unambiguously to intelligent design, to the origin by an intelligent designer.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. That is the alternative that explains biodiversity. And here, these are the 18, I list here 18 different mechanisms which are involved in organismal development and full architecture of multicellular organisms. So that you have 18 different genetic and epigenetic mechanisms.
Where's the mechanism that can select the correct amino acids, Antangelo?
I don't mean to play devil's advocate, but the problem with special creation is that it has no explanatory power. Well, actually, I think that materialism has no explanatory power. Materialism cannot give compelling, reasonable explanations in regards of the origin of the universe, in regards of the origin of the fine-tuning, It cannot explain the origin of life. Evolution is a failed proposition. It cannot explain the body-mind problem. It cannot explain morality. It cannot explain basically anything. It cannot explain the origin of sex, the origin of many different features which we see in the natural world. So in my understanding, it is materialism that has no explanatory power. And all these things are reasonably explained by an intelligence which is on the bottom of reality.
Come on in, spaghetti alien.
Anyone that wants to come in, I put here the link. Feel free to come. We won't eat you.
500 amino acids that they have to select from, Antangelo.
Each protein has an average of about 400 amino acids, and each amino acids, you have 20 different amino acids to select from. So how does that occur by random means?
In a microenvironment somewhere in a deep sea vent.
Yeah, that is the most common proposition today. The problem is that you can't concentrate the molecules at one building site. They are diluted. So how do you solve that problem? How do you concentrate only the building blocks that are required for life in the vents?
Yeah, that's what Professor Dave was saying. Well, you just have to find some natural filtration mechanism.
Yeah. Hi, Spaghetti Alien.
Bonjour, gentlemen.
Yeah. So what's up?
Well, I've been following you guys for a while, you and Smokey and the whole gang, and I appreciate your faith and what you're trying to do. I guess I've listened to too many atheist debates that I've become skeptical myself.
That's good. What are you questioning?
I don't think it is a bad thing to be skeptical. And the problem is that the name skeptical has been adopted by atheists and materialists, which are skeptic in regards of theism and believers. But I say the same thing. I am skeptical that materialism is an adequate explanation of origins and existence of the material world. So if an atheist wants to challenge me and say that he has a better proposition, he needs to provide positive explanations which top theism in order to have a view which would be valid, and not just say, "Oh, I don't believe you." That's what most atheists do today. They just say, "Oh, we don't believe you," but in order to top theism, you need to have provide better explanations.
Yeah, I understand that line of reasoning, and I think part of the problem for me is that I think the skeptical mindset is correct in that as far as logical arguments, whether they be, tag or cosmological, ontological, whatever, that you get to a God concept, but you can't really define it. And, I a lot of times with atheists, I'll approach it on that level, but I think it's certainly logically, to me, it makes sense that there has to be some type of creative mind that created the laws of physics and chemistry and everything else that caused the cosmos to create us. I honestly, I only have an undergraduate science background, and back when I was in college, I remember in the college newspaper, Daily Aztec, was going back and forth creation and evolution, and I put in my creation spiel, and the evolutionary biologist professor responded, because I was following Henry Morris and CRI, thinking, and the evolutionary biologist response was at the end of his it was just in the opinion column in the Daily Aztec. He said, "And anyone that believes this should not be granted a university degree."
So, there's scientism is a real thing. And, I agree with you guys that, DNA, it has to have some type of a creative mind behind it. I don't think it could have just randomly assembled itself. It is, our brains are the most complex system in the universe, quadrillion, connections. Our computer minds are way more advanced than anything we've created. But let me ask you guys this, because I've for a long time I've pretty much been old Earth and the special creation, as I put in my comment there in the chat, doesn't really have any explanatory power, so you can't really argue it except as a faith claim, pretty much.
Well, as I said previously, I disagree with that because we know that intelligence is capable of making complex things like machines, turbines, factories, power generation plants, all these blueprints, instructional information. We as intelligent beings can do all that kind of stuff, and that's what we observe and see in nature, and especially on a molecular level. And of course, if you ask me, how did God create all the living and so forth, then of course we do not have an explanation, because we also do not understand how the mind-body interface works. When I have a thought, for example, to move my arm, how that command, that will, is transformed into a physical event, we do not know how that occurs. So we cannot explain or give an answer in regards of that question. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't occur. We know it occurs, and that's sufficient. We do not need an explanation of the explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your reasoning, and I agree with you. I think philosophically, in terms of ontology and metaphysics, epistemology, and everything, you have to. I mean, I think that definitely points to God. There's, Kalam and Tag are all valid arguments, but when you're arguing with a materialist, they're going to want a materialist answer, and they're not even going to accept metaphysics or even inference to best explanation that doesn't have a logical line of reasoning that goes from point A to point B. And I can understand that. I think that's a valid point that they make, and so that's why I say that in a sense special creation is a faith claim, in the same sense that the resurrection is. I do believe Jesus rose from the dead, but I can't prove it, and their arguments are valid in the sense that, I think if there's anyone that was ever true that walked the earth, it was Christ and the disciples. So I definitely, accept their testimony. But, I think in a sense, you hit a wall when you come up with someone. Well, I just tried. It's my second time trying to call into the Atheist Experience. So I'm sure you can empathize with this, Tangelo. The first time, I brought up Bayesian probability and Spinoza and Einstein, and Matt basically hung up on me. And after he hung up, he said, "And when it comes to God, motherfucker, I'm smarter than Einstein." And it shows, his mentality right there. But I think, I understand Einstein's position, and maybe he never had a personal experience where he felt like, the Holy Spirit or God, was manifesting in his personal reality. But I think, that conception of the universe is viable as an explanation logically, a lot more so than trying to say that brute facts and, eternal laws of physics that somehow created themselves brought all this into existence. So, it's ironic because I watch a lot of the T-Jump debates, and he always defaults to naturalistic pantheism, even though he doesn't, he just uses that as his dodge mechanism. But, I agree with you guys, spiritually and in terms of what spiritual reality is. And, perhaps, the quantum realm and consciousness, there's an interconnection between the two that we haven't discovered. And alternate dimensions can explain the spiritual realm. And I've had personal experiences, that lead me to believe that, God definitely exists. So, it's, I don't know, it's the most important questions that we can contemplate in our lives. So, I think you guys are doing a service to the world to, keep the message out there. It's just, we get someone, as smart as McClatchy debating Dillahunty, and even he can't really win a debate with him just because, if you have that Humean skepticism, you can always default to, where, prove God through scientific evidence mentality, and ultimately we really can't do that.
Well, actually, I don't think that the fact that Matt is not convinced by our arguments means that he won the argument. It just demonstrates his state of mind, nothing else.
Oh, I know, but in terms of the average person watching the debates that maybe don't know a lot of philosophy and haven't studied the science, it may come across as he won. And I think that's why Jonathan got so frustrated at the end there, and in the fact that he called God stupid. I think that's really why he left the debate at the end of that one. But I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous, the atheists always defaulting to the, question of slavery and trying to say that it's a moral wrong, when if you don't accept concepts of good and evil, and if you accept evil, that's a proof for God in itself. You can make a modus tollens argument, a syllogism that leads you to God just from the existence of evil, whether or not you try to justify it as God being justified and allowing it to happen.
Hey guys.
Yeah, hello.
Tangelo, I watched your rebuttal of that Dr. Dave, and it was excellent. You just totally dismantled all the pseudoscience that he put forth in that video. That took a lot of work on your effort. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, but I just
Hey, Nephilim, this is a good question for you. I asked it in the chat earlier. And I've heard you speak a little bit on it, but maybe you could flesh it out a bit. How do you debunk radioactive decay dating for old Earth, evolution?
Well, there's a couple of things to be pointed out about it. Firstly, because a material has a radioactive decay rate that yields a daughter isotope over vast ages of time doesn't mean that that material came into existence vast ages of time ago. It's completely plausible that all radioactive materials came into existence 6,000 years ago, and just but have a decay rate that's extremely long. So then how do you explain the parent isotope to daughter isotope ratios? Well, the biggest problem for the evolutionist here is that water washes radioisotopes into and out of rocks. And so, for example, if a radioisotope dating is done on a rock that's 20 feet deep in the earth and it comes up with a date of 11 million years, and they dig 30 feet deeper in the earth and they come up with a date on a rock for a rock that is 39 million years old, the evolutionist assumes because the one is deeper in the earth is older, because that's their view of the geologic column. The deeper it is, the older it is, right? But there's entirely possible that water has washed radioisotopes out of the rocks at the top into the rocks at the bottom, which would skew their dating method and make it appear that the rock in the bottom is older than the one at the top by removing. Moreover, since these rocks that they find are found in sedimentary strata, they're not sedimentary rocks, but they're found. You don't date sedimentary rocks with radioisotope dating. They date igneous rocks. Rocks made that are made from magma, volcanic, or transformed from that. So, metamorphic rock maybe. But so nonetheless, they're found interleaved in between sedimentary strata. And these strata were definitely produced during the Noahic flood, which took place 4,500 years ago. We know that it was created by the flood because the properties of the strata and the whole geologic column can only be produced by catastrophic events. You cannot get sedimentary strata over a vast period of time. They all have to be, they are produced. One strata is no older or younger than the one above it or below it by any significant amount of time, because strata form in groups horizontally, not vertically over vast ages of time. This has been demonstrated in the laboratory numerous times. Scientists are well aware of this. Geologists are well aware of it. Paleontologists are aware of it. So strata form. The problem is the evolutionist believes that the strata may have formed rapidly, but there's vast amount of time in between them. But that's impossible. So what they're in denial of the science of sedimentology today. They have to deny it. But because they're these metamorphic rocks are in between sedimentary strata, and the strata were all produced by a cataclysmic event, then the materials, regardless of what the dating method produces, can't be millions of years old, because the strata below the sedimentary, the metamorphic or igneous rock, is not significantly older than the strata above it, and it was all produced by a cataclysmic event. So this means no matter what numbers they come up with, their radiometric dating is in error, and when it provides millions of years, it's not possible. So the Noahic flood wipes away all radiometric dating assumptions. Furthermore, there's assumptions built into the dating methods. They actually use fudge factors. And I'm not kidding. They actually use what's called a fudge factor. That is, they tweak the equipment to give them the date that they're, to move the date towards what they're looking for. And the method produces an array of dates. It might produce, let's say, 80 million years, 95 million years, 102 million years, and 127 million years, and 140 million years. And one scientist turns to the other and says, hey, Bob, how old is that index fossil that goes and matches that sedimentary strata according to our assumptions about the geological column? Oh, that one's 90 million years old. Let's see. Okay, this one's closest to 90. Okay, scrap the rest of the dates. We'll keep this one. That's exactly how they do it. They actually pick the date and discard the rest. And so there's a lot of assumptions that go into them. But the simplest answer is that because the dating method, the materials they date are in between sedimentary strata laid down by the Noahic flood, regardless of what numbers they produce, the materials that they're dating cannot be that age. It's not possible.
Yeah, I would have to look into the data collector, but it sounds plausible, but I'd really have to look at the data.
Well, here's some examples. The Nicorette lava flow in the bottom of the Grand Canyon has been dated numerous times, and they come up with dates anywhere from 10,000 years to 2.1 billion years. Which one is correct? You know, and the 1986 flow of magma that came out of Mount St. Helens has been dated to hundreds of thousands of years old, but that material formed, solidified into solid rock in 1986. How can it be millions of years old? What this means is that the daughter isotope and parent isotopes became fixed in space when that magma solidified and got hard like a rock when it cools down. And in that same, you know, you go dig up a chunk of it and you date it, and you got a daughter isotope and a parent isotope. The ratio gives you, let's say, 10, 20 million years of age. But all that proves is that the daughter and parent isotope were in the material as it was flowing while it was still plastic. And they became solidified in close proximity to each other when that rock cooled down. That doesn't mean that the rock was that millions of years of age. The only explanation is that both parent and daughter isotope were in the magma flow and came to a stop when it cooled down enough it couldn't flow anymore. And you have that ratio built right in there. But the daughter isotope wasn't produced by the parent isotope. Couldn't have happened since 1986. See? So there's lots of problems with their dating methods, and they don't like thinking about them, much less talking about them.
Well, I had the opportunity. I worked out at the Grand Canyon for a little while, so I stared out at that huge chasm every day, and it, even accepting a cataclysmic flood, it just didn't seem like the erosion would be possible. But I mean, it's pure speculation on my part. But it has the appearance of being very ancient.
Well, if you look at it a different way, you might see it differently. If you look at the edges all around the Grand Canyon, the edges of the rocks, the various layers going up, and even the top of the Grand Canyon, it's all very edgy and sharp. That could not be the case if that canyon was millions of years old. It would all be rounded down. The canyon wouldn't be a canyon as we know it. It would be a valley, because the top parts of it would have eroded down and filled in the bottom. And that would have happened in just a relatively short period of time, a few million years. The canyon is believed to be, 66 or 68 million years old, about the time dinosaurs went extinct that canyon formed, allegedly. So, but in 60 million years, that canyon would have filled in with debris at the bottom, and the top would be rounded. But they're very edgy, which proves they can't have been exposed to erosion for millions upon millions of years. It's not possible. There's a pitiful amount of debris in the bottom of those canyons where material has eroded down to the top. It's a pitiful amount. If that canyon had existed for tens of millions of years, it would literally be filled up with debris because of erosion. So you take a look at it again, and look at the pictures of the Grand Canyon, see how edgy all those rocks are, and start thinking about how could those rocks remain so sharp and edgy with right angles to them over tens of millions of years, and you'll start to think, hey, that can't be right. And you'll start seeing the canyon in a different way.
Okay, that's plausible. Another question, how about the formation of limestone?
Well, limestone is sedimentary rock, and during the flood, there would have been so the evolutionist has to believe that the calcium phosphates in the rock that make up the rock are all produced by coccolithophores, by microscopic sea organisms, the shells left from them, like chalk, right? But the problem is that that doesn't have to have millions of years of explanation. It's believed that during the in the pre-flood world, there were massive plumes of coccolithophores living in the oceans of the world. Truly a massive amount of that stuff. And when the environment of the oceans changed because the hot water coming out with a lot of minerals in them from inside the earth, it flooded the earth and dirtied the oceans. The chemistry and heat killed quadrillions times quadrillions of coccolithophores, and when those creatures die, their gases expel from their bodies. They lose their gases, and the gases go bubbling up, and the organism loses buoyancy, and it sinks to the bottom. And that could account for massive plumes of coccolithophores dying suddenly during the flood of Noah and precipitating out of the oceans to become massive columns of rock.
It's a plausible explanation. Another question, in terms of biology, is it really feasible that the vast amount of speciation could have taken place, in 4,000 years or whatever the time frame is? If we're assuming that it really was a worldwide flood and all the land animals were killed except for taken into the Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
I mean,
how do we account for so many different species? I get it. Well, there's a couple of things that can be said about it. First off, organisms are capable of producing tremendous variety by the process of recombination, genetic recombination, and phenotypic plasticity. So they can really they can adapt in some remarkable ways relatively quickly to their environments. But life can be divided into kinds, though, and the kinds produce varieties of themselves, And so we have an explanation for it. And here comes Standing for Truth. I want him to chime in on this too. It comes down to heterozygosity. The information that God put into the genomes of these creatures give them the ability to produce tremendous variety of themselves without changing anatomy. So varieties are morphological, they're not anatomical. And so that accounts for a tremendous amount of variety. But if you, and it's also, I personally believe that God, oh, my cat's going crazy. All right. So it's also possible that God created more than one kind of cat, for example. God may have created small cats. He may have created large cats in all the organisms. For example, bobcats, lynx, African wildcats, and several other species may all be one kind. And yet tigers, lions, saber-toothed cats may have also been one kind. So it's possible that God created more than one kind of cat, more than one kind of ape. It's not necessary that all apes are derived from a common ape. Like God didn't have to create just one kind of ape and then all apes be varieties of that ape. It may be that God created 5 different kinds, original created kinds of ape, and all the ape varieties that we have are adaptations of those 5. So that's a possibility as well. In fact, I believe that's true. There are hundreds of different, 10,000 species of birds. Standing for Truth is fixing to talk about this, but I'm going to touch on what he's about to say real quick before he begins. He's going to provide some great information. I think it's possible that God created many more than one kind of bird. God may have created 20 or 100 different kinds of bird.
That's right.
Maybe 1,000 different kinds of bird, and they're able to produce 10,000 different species. Go ahead and tell us more about it, Standing for Truth.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything Brother Neff was saying with the built-in genetic diversity that he was calling heterozygosity, with front-loaded heterozygosity in, say, the original animal kinds that God would have created, speciation events, adaptive episodes, they can happen quickly. And we're actually seeing that today with like epigenetics, for example. But when it comes to the species, that's a really good question. And what Brother Neff was talking about is the perfect explanation. And what you can do actually is look up the exact numbers of species today and just calculate backwards to 4,500 years since the Ark, for example. And you can see, I'm sharing screen here, you can see the numbers are actually perfectly in line with young Earth creation expectations. But here's what's funny. If you look here, there's about 10,000 bird species today, okay? Therefore, we as young Earth creationists, we would predict, and the thing is, bird species, that's one of the more difficult ones to account for. So I like to go for the most difficult. For example, if you go lizards, you've only got 4,600 lizard species, 3,600 species of snakes. I mean, that's one species per year in 4,500 years. That's easy. Bats, you've only got about 1,240. So birds. So here's the thing. We would just need to account for about 2 to 3 per year in 4,500 years. Just last year, 2017, you can see here, a new bird species has evolved on the Galapagos Island. And what's funny is, as Neff was explaining how these original kinds would have been front-loaded with created heterozygosity, the exact same mechanism that creationists would say would need to take place to derive new species is exactly what was observed on the Galapagos Island with this new bird species. What was seen was shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. So it's like more, let's say, genetic variability towards less genetic variability. That's what we would say as creationists. Now, here's the thing. That makes sense. So we're seeing new bird species today. So 2 to 3 is very easy to account for in 4,500 years. We only got 10,000 bird species. Look at the evolutionist side. Look at the deep time evolution. model. So they say birds today, modern birds, evolved from theropod-like dinosaurs roughly 65, maybe 100 million years ago, okay? So if we see new bird species today before our very own eyes, why aren't there like 500,000 bird species? If deep time evolution is true, 65 million years, for example, why are there only 10,000 species? Why are there only 4,600 lizard species, 3,600 species of snake, bats, cats, dogs? You know, the numbers of species are perfectly in line with young Earth creation expectations. So, yeah, how would you answer that question? You know, why so few species if evolution is true?
Let me interject something. Recently, the theropod dinosaur to bird evolution story has come under fire from secular scientists themselves. They're starting to think it could, some have even written it could be the other way around, because birds are now known to have coexisted with dinosaurs early in the age of dinosaurs. Cretaceous period. They found completely avian footprints in Cretaceous rock. I mean, that's long before the dinosaurs went extinct, right?
Yeah, so that's like, so you're looking at maybe 120 million years, and yet only 10,000 bird species today. So like, to spaghetti alien, it looks like you're skeptical, which is good. You know, how would you, if you do hold to deep time evolution, why are there not 500,000 bird species? If, as Neff is pointing out, it would go back even further than 65 million years, 100 million years. You know, how would you account for that?
Well, I mean, wouldn't extinction explain some of that?
Well, even if you account for extinction events, let's say that if you accounted for extinction events, then the 10,000 is still far too few, because in 100 million years, you're going to need like extinction event after extinction event after extinction event. So it's just not feasible. And what's funny is because you were saying that special creation doesn't have any explanatory power, but I've got in front of me several technical papers by creation scientists, PhDs in genetics, biology, for example, and they've made testable predictions. They said, okay, if there's this many bird species today, if there's this many cat species today, then we should expect this many per year in 4,500 years. And this is exactly what we're seeing. But evolutionists, like you said, they have to account for extinction event after extinction event. I debated a zoologist who would probably be the best to ask this question to, and he admitted he couldn't make predictions because they would have to invoke unrealistic numbers of extinction events, you know. But for us, it just is perfectly in line, the number of species.
Okay, another couple quick questions that kind of bother me. Archaeopteryx, how do we explain that fossil?
I guess that would be up to Brother Neff if he wants to answer it, if I want to answer it. Oh, I think Brother Neff might have left. So when you're looking to transitional fossils, what you see when it comes to Archaeopteryx, what you see when it comes to Tiktaalik, what you see when it comes to, say, the mammal-like reptiles, these are the exceptions to the rules. So when we see interesting mosaics, maybe like the platypus, you know, the living platypus today, this is exactly what we would expect based on the design hypothesis. I mean, we see interesting mosaics in the design world, like the military engineers and develops vehicles called amphibious assault vehicles, which blends the features of land vehicle and vehicles built for the ocean. So this is just expected from an engineering perspective. But when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of each transitional form, like Archaeopteryx, you can see even experts in evolution would say that Archaeopteryx, for example, was nothing but a perching bird, or Tiktaalik was nothing but a bottom-dwelling lobe-finned fish. But even if there are some interesting mosaics, it's perfectly expected from the biblical design model. If evolution was true, you'd see the rule being the mosaics, being the transitionals. But we only see a few that we could sit here and argue with, and Archaeopteryx is one of them. So,
yeah, if you go to your Museum of Natural History and look in the fish tank, you'll see a creature that looks virtually identical to Tiktaalik rosea, but the biggest difference between them is the distance between the eyes. No kidding. Looks just like Tiktaalik. So, I mean, how transitional is that creature anyway? It's just not. It's rare in the fossils. That's what made Jennifer Clack and Per Alberg and Henning and all the others who found this creature jump for joy, was because they couldn't find such creatures in the fossil record. Then they find one. But gosh, they're living today. So big evolution there, huh?
Yeah, same thing with the I forget the name of it, that fossil fish that's however many millions of years old supposedly. But what was had a question regarding, oh yeah, what about wouldn't the rarity of fossilization itself explain the lack of transitional forms to some extent?
Well, the only mechanism that can explain a fossil record fossils require a creature not only to be buried rapidly, but they require highly mineralized water to seep into the ground where that animal is, to replace its bone with calcium carbonate. And so the waters of the ocean today don't possess the materials necessary to create fossils. So if uniformitarianism is true, and the oceans have always been like they have today, relatively clean, then there could never have been fossils, you see. There certainly couldn't have had a fossil record so abundant, so many fossils. It's just not possible. So only the flood explains why the waters of the earth could have had such mineral content in them so as to create a fossil record to begin with. Uniformitarianism can't explain the fossil record. It's a no-go. So when evolutionists say, oh, the fossils show evolution, say, what? You can't have a fossil record by uniformitarianism processes. It's not even possible. The waters of the earth have never been dirty enough with calcium in order to make a fossil. The flood of Noah is the only mechanism that can explain that.
Well, Brother Neff hit the nail on the head there, but if I could screen share real quick, I'm curious if Alien is familiar with this latest study, especially because you're talking about the species and then, some of the so-called mosaics. Well, first off, if you want to use Archaeopteryx, you'd have to address, or the evolution, because it sounds like you're skeptical, which is good, you're open-minded, but like Brother Neff was saying, they found bird footprints earlier than birds were supposed to have evolved, with the theropod dinosaurs, for example. Also, the fact that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this new study, but they analyzed barcodes across 100,000 species. And what they discovered was genetic boundaries, very clear genetic boundaries, and that over 90% of species today originated at exactly the same time, which, as Brother Neff was talking about, the Noah's flood explaining the fossils. Well, we know of a bottleneck that could explain such low genetic diversity. In this study, what they were looking at was a very specific, highly conserved mitochondrial DNA gene. It's called the CO1 gene. And across all these different species, they had extremely low genetic diversity. And the evolutionist, in one of the authors, he said, this conclusion is very surprising, and I fought against it as hard as I could. But, people like, Neff and I or Otangelo, we don't need to fight against it, because it's exactly what we would expect, is that all today's species originated at the same time, just 4,500 years ago at the flood, during the flood bottleneck. Are you familiar with that specific study? It's pretty fascinating, Alien.
Yeah, well, let me throw this out, because I've listened to Josh Swamidas, some of his, his views on the evolutionary time frame and everything. Do you think that he's just an error, or don't you think that his knowledge of genetics is pointing him in the right direction?
Actually, that's a very good question. So Joshua Swamidas, I'm very familiar with him, as well as the arguments from BioLogos. And their biggest argument is, how can we explain the levels of genetic diversity in humans today if we truly descended from, say, Adam and Eve just 6,000 years ago, or our last Y chromosomal ancestor, which would be 4,500 years ago at the time of Noah. But for one, as you can see in the slide here, that assumes that mutations are the ultimate source of all variety. But someone like Swamidas, it's a silly argument, because theologically speaking, Would God have created Adam and Eve in the biblical kind with no genetic diversity built in, with no DNA differences? Of course, God didn't mean to be fruitful and multiply and do this through cloning themselves. So it makes sense that Adam and Eve would have been front-loaded with pre-existing functional DNA differences. And as you can see here in the slide, time is not required for the diversity today because diversity can be designed and built into Adam and Eve. What's funny is, if we truly did descend from just two people that were front-loaded with genetic diversity just 6,000 years ago, we should expect low genetic diversity in humans today. And that's actually what the evolutionary community discovered. And they were shocked that they ended up inventing you're probably familiar with the hypothetical out of Africa population bottleneck in order to explain the low genetic diversity. So yeah, Swami Das, that's his main argument, and it fails. It fails scientifically and theologically. We have no reason to believe that God would not have created Adam and Eve with, as Neff was saying earlier, with front-loaded genetic diversity. It only makes sense.
Yeah. On top of that, the fact that it's been discovered that Africans, the various tribes, there are numerous tribes of people in Africa, numerous. And these various African peoples have greater genetic variety between themselves than Europeans do or Asians and Mid-Easterners. So this contradicts the evolution theory. Man's diversity, genetic diversity, should have increased after he came out of Africa. And so the African people who remained in Africa should show lower genetic diversity than the Europeans and the Asians and everything. But when we compare the genetic diversity of those peoples to Africans, we find the opposite of what evolution expects. There's greater genetic diversity amongst African people than there is against the peoples that live outside of Africa. That contradicts the evolution theory. The evolution theory would have us believe that after man came out of Africa, his genetic diversity would continuously increase because of single nucleotide polymorphs, if nothing else. But so what we actually find contradicts the theory.
That's a really good point, Neff. That's a fact. Everything about the out of Africa scenario with human origins from the evolutionary perspective that Neff and I are talking about is actually contrary to the empirical data. Even the 1Y chromosomal line, for example, here's a paper recently by Dr. Jensen, Harvard graduate. Evidence for a human Y chromosome molecular clock. Pedigree-based mutation rates suggest a 4,500-year history for the human paternal inheritance, exactly what we would expect with the flood bottleneck. Obviously, that 4,500-year ancestor would be Noah. And also, when it comes to mitochondrial DNA, if you see this chart here, this is same Harvard graduate, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. He derived this. This is a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. And when you map it out, you can see right in the middle. And Joshua Swamidas knows all about this. And his rebuttals, I find, are very weak to it. But you can see three major haplogroups, okay? L, M, and N. Now, who were we repopulated by after the flood? Well, Noah's three daughters-in-law, Noah's three sons and their daughters-in-law. Women, we inherit mitochondrial DNA exclusively from our mothers. And lo and behold, we've got three main mitochondrial DNA haplogroups signifying Noah's three daughters-in-law, plus so the thing is, a starting point from Genesis has very, very serious genetic implications, genetic expectations. We can make predictions, retrodictions. There's a lot of explanatory power there. And we just see it more and more every day. Genetics is confirming the Genesis account of human origins. It's fascinating. So are you familiar with Dr. Jensen's work there, Alien?
I haven't read any of his papers, but I've heard you guys talk about him a lot. Another question that I won't say it plagues me, but I think is an interesting one is the whole, chromosome 2 debate. How do you explain that?
Well, right here you can see a paper. This is from a secular journal, The Evolution of African Great Ape Subtelomeric Heterochromatin and the Fusion of the Human Chromosome 2. And they conclude chimpanzee and gorilla chromosomes differ from human chromosomes by the presence of large blocks of subterminal heterochromatin thought to be composed primarily of arrays of tandem satellite sequence. So in other words, for the layman, if there really was an ape-specific chromosome 2 fusion, because if humans and chimpanzees truly are related. We split, say, 6 million years ago from a common ancestor, and at some point in the human line, there was a chromosome 2 fusion. We should find traces of this ape-specific satellite DNA in the human chromosomes, around the reputed fusion site, and yet it's not found. We differ from chimpanzees there. Not to mention, here's a paper by Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins. A problem with the alleged cryptic centromere is that its human alphoid repeat DNA sequence does not closely match chimpanzee centromeres and chromosomes. And not only that, the area where the telomeres are supposed to be found, if there was a fusion, highly, highly degenerate. So everything that we actually see around that area, and Brother Neff can go into the functional nature of the so-called reputed fusion site that's overturned it as well. But all the evidence, once again, is opposite of what you'd expect if there really was a fusion event. So good question.
Right. The alleged fusion site is now known to be spanned by a set of genes that produces helicase, the machinery that duplicates, not helicase, but polymerase 2, which is a machine that translates information in the DNA. The problem with that is this, think about it. So if for this to be true, the only way that could be, if it was a fusion site, is for the information that codes for this machinery in the cell to have been written over information that was written over the two ends of the chromosomes after they fused. It would have to have been coded over, like on a hard drive in a computer. You have a piece of information, you have two files, you deleted them, but they're still technically on the hard disk, and then the hard disk comes along and rewrites new information over the top of them. That's the only way that it could be there. So the evolutionists are stuck with believing that for some reason, somehow, after these two chromosomes fused, genetic information got written over the top of these by replacing the base pairs to turn this into a set of genes that spans across the fusion site that codes for the polymerase machinery. Now, what process is going to do that? There is no genetic. DNA doesn't operate like a hard disk drive. It doesn't just rewrite over, well, I don't need those bits of information. We just write over that with some new. That destroys information. DNA doesn't work like that. It cuts, inserts, and binds information. It doesn't write over the top of existing information. That would be completely destructive to the genome of the organism and introduce the horrific diseases, deformities, or death. It can't do that. So this kills the idea that it's a fusion, because there's no mechanism in genetics whereby a string of information just gets written over the top. A string of information gets completely recoded as information that produces a cellular machine. That doesn't happen in genetics. So this by itself kills the fusion site idea.
Well, if you think of it this way, Alien, you don't gain highly important genes, as Neff is talking about, by just slamming together two chromosomes. And that's exactly what we see that this fusion site actually is. It's the reputed fusion site that they say where the fusion took place is overlapped by a functional gene. So the evidence actually seems to suggest that that so-called fusion site, not to mention the satellite DNA problem, the degeneracy problem, the lack of a cryptic centromere like we were talking about, but that fusion site really doesn't look like it's a fusion site at all. As Neff is saying, it's just a functional component of the DDX11L2 gene.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, the genes that code for these molecular machines that is allegedly written over the top of the fusion site is not just something that evolutionists complain, oh, that's Jeffrey Tompkins garbage. They point to the creationist scientist and say, oh, you're stupid hothead creationist scientist. That's his information. That's not true. It's in three major genetics databases in the world. The three major genetic databases, one of them in Japan, two of them in the United States, that where even the secular camp acknowledges that this information spans across the fusion site and it codes for polymerase. So this isn't just some idea that some creationist is inventing or come up with. This is recorded as a science fact by this mainstream science. It's in their databases that this genetic information spans across the fusion site. So it's not just something invented by creationists to give an account. It's their camp that says so too. So that kills the idea. It can't be a fusion site. There's no mechanism to rewrite a series of genes across the top of other string of information to code for, DNA doesn't just say, well, we need a place to store some information from polymerase. Why? We already got it over here. I don't know. It'd be fun. Hey, let's write it down over there. It doesn't work that way. The gene,
Well, it's funny because you'll get it, and I've had full debates on the chromosome 2 fusion, so has Neff, and they'll try and downplay the actual expression of the area, the expression levels. They'll try and downplay the function of the area itself. And this directly from Dr. John Sanford in Contested Bones, he goes over some of the components of that area, and he says the reputed fusion site sequence reveals that it's an active promoter for the transcription of an alternative transcript. It binds at least 12 transcription factors. It initiates RNA transcription, which begins with its own sequence, and it has a chromatin profile that further supports its active promoter status. So
yes,
there's no denying it.
And it's involved in 250 different cell type developments.
Right. So there's no way you're going to gain that kind of function by slamming together 2 chromosomes.
No.
And what's funny is even if there was a chromosome 2 fusion, because of the fact that, as I was saying earlier with the Ventura paper, that's actually a secular paper, that chimps have very distinctive and very large satellite sequences at the ends of their chromosomes, and it's absent in man when those large ape-specific satellite sequences should be seen flanking the reputed fusion site. Therefore, even if there really was a fusion, it would have occurred in the human line. And based on that lack of ape-specific satellite DNA, it would have just occurred probably at the time of the flood, where there was a bottleneck, and obviously would have given humanity the opportunity to pass the fusion on to everybody. So it's funny, it's 0 for 2 for the evolutionists. The evidence suggests there was no fusion, but even if there was, it's better explained under a biblical creation model.
Yes.
That's fascinating. You guys are speaking pretty much over my head on a lot of the scientific terminology, but isn't there something like with the telomeres that leads them to believe that it actually is a fusion site?
It just has the visual appearance of 2 telomeres. That's all. That's all it is. It just looks like the arrangement of the base pairs looks like 2 telomeres. Just so happens to look like 2 telomeres. That's the only evidence they really have.
Yeah. And the thing is, they were actually shocked in the original chromosome 2 fusion paper. They thought there would be more telomeric sequences if there really was a fusion event. And what's funny is it turns out that what we do see there is highly degenerate. Now, the evolutionists had said, well, we expect it to be degenerate because they got to force fit all the data into the story. So they said, well, it's degenerate because it's been millions and millions of years, and therefore degeneracy has occurred, or the telomeres themselves were degenerate when the fusion happened. But here's the funny thing. Here's what destroys that rescue device. It turns out that those internal telomeric-like sequences that are found in that area are actually found all over the genome. And there are many papers, I've got a couple here with me, published that give us functions in expression of those sites. So now what they're finding there is not just special to that area. They're found all throughout the genome. They're functional DNA elements, nothing to do with the chromosome 2 fusion. So that was a good question, Alien. Yeah, that's been dealt with too.
I need to correct myself. The site does code for helicase. A complex group of helicase genes are there. So, and I was right when I said it first, and then I tried to correct myself. I had forgotten. It does code for helicase. The machinery that duplicates the DNA molecule expands across that fusion site, and that just can't happen naturally. And on top of that, it was reported by one secular scientist named Costa in 2009 that at least 18 different genes human genes, sphenic site, and these are not found in close proximity in any chimpanzee or ape. In other words, the locations, there are only 2 locations for DDX11L found in chimpanzees and 4 in a gorilla, and their locations don't correspond to those of the human, so they're not found in the same spot. So if we were to have inherited our DNA from them, then these genes should be in nearly, if not exactly, the same locus in the DNA, but they're not. So this information that codes for helicase and polymerase in the human genome that spans across this alleged fusion site isn't found in the same location in apes and chimpanzees. It's found in different places, way over there or way over here. Not in the same location. It should be in relatively the same spot, if not exactly the same spot, if we inherited those genes from apes.
Well, one of the other things that I find kind of points towards evolution from what the little studying that I've done into it is the whole retrovirus theory. Doesn't that point towards some type of common ancestry?
Well, with me and Neff, that's actually probably one of our favorite topics. So are you ready for an hour lecture on ERVs? Well, I mean, for me, I could sum it up in probably 20 seconds. These endogenous retroviruses, and there's actually other classes of retrotransposons. There's a lot of what evolutionists claim are the ancient remnants of viral infections, through millions of years of evolutionary history. But what's funny is they're finding, and I've got paper after paper, I might as well just screen share, but it's showing that these retrotransposons are highly, highly functional. And functional in a crucial fashion. They're regulating gene expression. They're involved in self-stress responses. And what's funny, when you ask an evolutionist, I've debated biologists, so has Neff, I'll ask for empirical evidence for a non-functional retrovirus going from non-functional to something extremely functional in development or cell differentiation. So all we say regarding these retrotransposons is that they are functionally functional DNA elements that were front-loaded by God in the original created kinds. And that's why we see that they're incredibly functional, like critically functional. In the mouse embryo, they've discovered that if you knock out one of these certain classes of retrotransposons, as the mouse is developing, boom, you snip it out, suddenly the mouse stops developing and it dies. So according to the evolutionary theory, I guess mice were never having children for millions of years until they managed to get infected by a virus. And, so go ahead, Neff. What do you think, brother?
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. That's true. They keep discovering extremely important, if not critical, functions for these allegedly viral DNAs that were inserted into man's genome. There is a mechanism where viral DNA gets inserted into your genome. That's a known process. But to believe that the information in the genome of a virus, which is typically 3,000 base pairs long, could have the information to regulate vastly larger amounts of human genetic information so as to produce the critical features of organisms like a human being is nonsense. That's like believing that the owner's manual for a photographic light manual, which is maybe 10 pages printed both back and front, has got the information necessary to regulate a team of 1,000 workers to produce an automobile in a BMW plant. It's nonsense. So here are some of the discoveries that have been made about alleged ERVs. When random and uncontrolled integration of ERVs has been observed, the outcome is cancerous tumors. ERVs function as promoters, initiating transcript of RNAs. They're the workhorses of the cell, which have many important functions. The ERVs in gene regulation, they regulate genes for fetal development of the human placenta, liver, colon, and salivary glands. So, boy, the genetic information in a virus has the instructions to instruct, okay, you cells over there, you be specialized to become this kind, and you genes, you express yourself for the next 30 minutes while these guys are going to shut off. And I mean, are you kidding me? No way. So, and then these ERV roles play roles in human immune system also to prevent the body from attacking itself. They function in cell tissue and tissue organization during fetal development. They have there's evidence that most of them don't become integrated into host genomes very well, so they're involved in creating specific organs. So here's the thing: if these genes that are allegedly ERVs, once viral, play a critical role in the development of the human placenta, liver, colon, and salivary glands, and I think other organs, then let's imagine that it would have had to have been integrated in a creature that exists long before humans, because if humans diverged from a common ancestor with chimpanzees, both humans and chimps would have had to have had the ERV before we diverged, because we both have salivary glands, colons, livers, and placentas, right? So if this is a ERV is necessary to create these organs, we have to keep going back down the evolutionary tree to find what organism didn't have the virus and didn't because it didn't have a placenta, liver, colon, or salivary gland. We're going to be going way, way down the evolutionary tree to find that organism. We're going to have to go before rats to find it. Okay, so the evolutionists counter this by saying that the information was usurped. Well, so if the organism already has that became infected with these ERVs already had a liver, placenta, colon, and salivary glands, then it has to have, the genetic processes had to have said, you know what, I'm tired of using these genes to make our liver, colon, and salivary glands. This guy just came into the neighborhood. Let's just use him instead. Huh? How does that work? You know, you're already got genetic information that's regulating genes to produce these organs. Why would you, this idea that the evolutionists have that these genetic information from the virus became adopted to be used for those purposes after, just several million years ago, before chimpanzees evolved, a couple of million years before that, it's nonsense, because you've already got perfectly functional genes that are regulating the genes that produce the liver, colon, salivary glands, and placenta. So it makes no sense to believe that the genome, the genetic functions of the organism would dismiss the existing genetic information that's performing that regulation, and then just adopt the information in the virus, and it happens to have the information that all things just keep going as though nothing ever happened. Or mutations would have to modify the genetic information in the virus DNA to make it do here's another potential scenario. It has the genetic information that regulates the other genes that develop these critical organs, right? And while life is going on, somehow mutations are transforming the ERV's information into that, so that it performs the same function as the existing information that regulates the genes. And then somehow the genome just says, I don't know, let me pick one of the two. We'll go with this guy instead. And how does that happen? How does random mutations transform the genome of a virus into the information that's capable of regulating the development of these organs? And if that happened, why would it resemble a virus anymore? So it doesn't actually resemble a virus. The thing is, they can't reverse engineer this. They can't take this information and decode it and say, look, this matches the genome of this virus. It doesn't match the genome of any virus. The only reason they claim that it's viral DNA is because it's a little snippet of unique genetic information that's found in the genome of a human and also in a chimpanzee. And a creator might be responsible for that kind of thing, where I'm going to use the same computer programmer. If you click File, Open, and Browse, you get a little dialog box in Windows for that, right? That's good code. The guys that use this might use that same series of code in a browser. They might use it in in a video making software. They might use it in a different one because it's good code. It has certain functions that are good, and it's common. It's functional and useful in those different software applications. Well, common design. It's also useful in the chimpanzee to regulate the genes. It's also useful in the human. But there's just no evidence that it actually was ever the genome of a virus.
Well, and I'll say one last thing, Alien, and then let you go. But I've shared screen here just to show you some visuals on what Neff and I are saying. Because a lot of the times the skeptics or the critics will say, you know, all you have is creationist sources or creationist citations and papers. Like what we're saying all comes from the secular literature. This is a fascinating one published 2019 August, just a year ago. Far from being junk DNA, the pervasive retrotransposons that populate the genome have a powerful capacity to influence genes and chromatin. So this whole idea of co-option or adoption, like Neff was saying, it's nothing but rescue devices, fancy storytelling. So like Neff said, when it comes to the common design, I typically ask, are these retroviruses really the ancient remnants of viral infections, or are they created units of DNA function? Now, the fact that we see they're highly functional and important in our genome, for example, the ALU, they influence alternative splicing, regulatory activities of transposable elements, scientists identify new beneficial function of endogenous retroviruses and immune response, like Neff was talking about. You know, these are all from secular journals. So therefore now it makes sense that we share these DNA elements with the chimpanzee. And they'll often say, like I've debated these biologists, Dr. Dan Stern, Cardinal, Dr. Stefan Fellow, they'll say, okay, well, what about the patterns? What about the nested hierarchical patterns? Okay, if these are created units of DNA function, which the evidence suggests they are, it makes logical sense that we would share more of them with the chimpanzee than we would with like an old world monkey or a fish or something like that. So those patterns are expected. We share more with a chimpanzee than we would share with a bacteria. You know, this is just expected from the common design hypothesis. So are you familiar with all of these functional roles and these this new research on the retrotransposons there, Alien?
Only at a very cursory level. I've listened to a lot of LPP's debates and yours, so just on a very cursory level. But yeah, to me, mutations never were really a viable mechanism, just from a layman's perspective. To like the evolution of a bird's wing, why would however many millions of mutations that would need to occur that would cause an organism to become less adapted to survive, you know, as it lost its claws and teeth and started to form, you know, the beginnings of wings or feathers, you know, how would that actually help it survive? And why would it continue in a process where it actually would use Bernoulli's principle of flight? You know, to me, that never really made sense, you know, and I've tried to look up the evolutionary explanations for it, and running, gliding reptiles, I don't think really gets it. But so you guys definitely make some valid points. And as I said, you're, you know, I think it's great that you're standing up for the scriptures and for Christ. And you've definitely given me a lot of food for thought. So I think I need to maybe look into it, you know, in a little more detail with scientific papers and see if I come to the same conclusions that you guys have.
No, do that. Yes, investigation is important. I would strongly encourage you to study this stuff myself. It's good that you're willing to do so.
Amen. Amen, Alien. Great questions. I know I can speak for Otangelo and Neff. We love answering these questions. We love answering the tough questions. We're just here to, you know, help brothers in Christ and sisters in Christ, and also help people that are on the fence or skeptical like yourself. So, unfortunately, my kids are getting kind of fussy. This has been fun. I got to get into bed, but Neff, or say if you guys are doing streams later on, I can probably join. But Otangelo, thanks so much for bringing me on your channel. You're doing some phenomenal work for the Lord, and yeah, great job to thanks for having me on.
Yes, I appreciate you. Here it's actually the first time that you guys are here at my channel, and I'm seeing that the number of visitors that are assisting are 23 people constantly now. That's fantastic. It was starting with 10, we are at 23, and I hope that doing this kind of work here on Sundays, it will help to grow our channel and answer questions to people that are on the fence and are in doubt in regards of these issues.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for spending the time and sharing with me. God
Yeah.
bless you guys.
God bless. Anytime. Anytime. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
Yeah, I think I will finish my live stream, already 3 hours here.
Okay.
And,
Well, thanks for letting me come in, Angelo, and I'll drop in again sometime.
Okay, fantastic. So to everyone that is assisting, good night. Thank you for being here, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay. God bless.